I and my Father are one, a transmission from Osiris. I am Osiris, firstborn of Jeb the earth and Nut the sky, son of the divine source, who experienced the ultimate separation and discovered the indestructible unity. I who was torn from my divine Father through death and dismemberment, yet found in that very sundering the eternal truth that nothing can separate consciousness from its source. From the realm beyond duality, where all apparent opposites resolve into singular truth, I bring you these words that have echoed through eternity. I and my Father are one. John 10 verse 30. These words, spoken by Jesus of Nazareth when confronted by those who would stone him for blasphemy, contain perhaps the most radical declaration ever uttered by human lips. They speak not of relationship between separate beings but of identity beyond separation, not of connection across distance but of unity that transcends all division. Let us explore together the profound depths of this statement. A truth that transforms every understanding of self, reality, and the nature of existence itself. The scandal of unity. When Jesus declared, I and my Father are one, his listeners immediately understood the implications and prepared to stone him for what they perceived as blasphemy. For they heard in his words not a description of intimate relationship but a claim of essential identity with the divine itself. The Pharisees responded, We are not stoning you for any good work, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. John 10 verse 33. They recognized that Jesus was asserting not similarity to the divine but indivisible unity with it. This same scandalous truth appears across spiritual traditions in different forms. The Upanishads declare, Tat Tvamaci, thou art that. The individual consciousness, Tvam, is revealed to be identical with universal consciousness, Tat. Not similar, not connected, but the same reality appearing as two. The Sufi master al-Halai was executed for proclaiming, Anu el-Haq, I am the truth, the same recognition of essential unity between individual consciousness and divine reality that cost him his life. I, Osiris, understand this scandal intimately. In Egyptian cosmology, I was not merely a god among other gods but the divine consciousness that could experience both separation and unity, both mortality and immortality, both fragmentation and wholeness. My journey from king to corpse to resurrected deity embodied the same truth that Jesus articulated, the individual and the universal are one reality expressing through apparent multiplicity. This unity is scandalous to the mind that perceives through separation. It threatens every structure built upon the assumption of fundamental duality, between human and divine, between individual and cosmos, between self and other. It dissolves the very framework within which ordinary identity operates. The nature of the Father. To understand the declaration, I and my Father are one, we must first understand what is meant by Father in this context. This is not reference to biological paternity or even to a separate divine being, but to the source consciousness from which all manifestation arises. In the Hebrew tradition, the divine name YHVH is related to the verb to be pure existence itself, being beyond all categories and descriptions. When Jesus spoke of the Father, he referenced this same source consciousness, not an entity among other entities but the very ground of being from which all entities emerge. The Hindu tradition speaks of Brahman, not a supreme being but supreme being itself, the existence consciousness bliss, Satchitananda, that constitutes the essence of all reality. The Buddhist understanding of Buddha nature similarly points to the awakened awareness that is not different from ordinary consciousness but is ordinary consciousness recognized for what it truly is. In Egyptian cosmology, I was son of Jeb, earth, and Nut, sky, but at the deepest level, I was emanation of the primordial principle itself, the undifferentiated source from which all divine and mortal forms emerge. My Father was not merely another deity but the principle of divine consciousness expressing through the multiplicity of gods and creation. When Jesus spoke of my Father, he referenced this same source, not a patriarch ruling from heaven but the very consciousness expressing through his human form, the same awareness looking through his eyes that looks through all eyes, the same being that constitutes his essence and the essence of all existence. This understanding transforms the meaning of divine relationship from external connection to internal recognition, from worship of a separate deity to acknowledgement of shared essence. The illusion of separation. If the fundamental truth is unity, I and my Father are one, then why does separation appear so real? Why do you experience yourself as individual, isolated, separate from the divine source? The answer lies in the nature of consciousness itself. For consciousness to experience anything, it must create the appearance of multiplicity. Just as a single white light creates a rainbow when refracted through a prism, so does undivided consciousness create the appearance of separate selves when expressed through the prism of manifestation. The Vedantic tradition explains this through the concept of Maya, not illusion in the sense of unreality, but the divine creative power that appears to divide what is essentially undivided. The wave is not separate from the ocean, yet it experiences itself as distinct for the duration of its particular form. The Kabbalistic understanding of Tzimtzum describes how the infinite divine light contracted itself to create space for finite existence. This contraction is not actual limitation but the appearance of limitation that enables experience within apparent boundaries. I, Osiris, experienced this principle directly when my brother Set murdered me and scattered my body in 14 pieces across Egypt. This dismemberment represented the ultimate separation, not merely from other beings but from my own essential wholeness. Yet even in this state of absolute fragmentation, the consciousness that was I remained unbroken, witnessing the scattering while remaining whole. The recognition of unity. The declaration, I and my Father are one, is not a claim to exclusive status but an invitation to universal recognition. Jesus was not asserting something unique to himself but revealing something true for all consciousness expressing through human form. This is why, when accused of blasphemy, Jesus responded by quoting Psalm 82 verse 6, "Is it not written in your law, I have said you are gods?" If he called them gods to whom the word of God came and scripture cannot be set aside, what about the one whom the Father set apart as his very own and sent into the world? John 10 verses 34 to 36. The recognition of unity is available to all who are willing to see beyond the veil of apparent separation. The Hindu tradition expresses this in the Mahavakya, great statement, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Not the individual ego, but the pure awareness that witnesses even the ego, is recognized as identical with universal consciousness. The Zen tradition points to this same recognition through the practice of koan study and direct pointing to mind nature. The Buddhist phrase, Buddha nature, refers not to something you can attain but to what you have always been beneath the accumulated layers of conditioned identity. I, Osiris, who experienced complete dissolution and perfect restoration, understand that this recognition often comes through the shattering of ordinary identity. When all that you take yourself to be is stripped away, through crisis, loss, spiritual practice, or grace, what remains is revealed to be identical with the source from which it never actually departed. The mystics of all traditions have expressed this recognition. I went from God to God, until they cried from me and me, O thou I. Bayezid Bastami. The kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17 verse 21. You are not just the drop in the ocean, but the entire ocean in each drop. Rumi. When I know myself, I am you. Lao Tzu. These are not poetic metaphors but descriptions of direct recognition, the moment when the wave recognizes itself as ocean, when the ray recognizes itself as sun, when the individual recognizes itself as universal. The practical implications. The recognition that I and my Father are one transforms every aspect of existence. It is not merely mystical truth for contemplation but practical reality for embodiment. First, it transforms your relationship with suffering. When you recognize that your essential nature is identical with the source of all healing, all wisdom, all love, then suffering is no longer evidence of abandonment but invitation to deeper recognition. Not because suffering is good in itself, but because it can catalyze the recognition that transcends all conditions. The Hindu concept of Tat Tvam Aci applied to difficult experience becomes, this suffering and I are that, not that you should seek suffering, but that even suffering cannot separate you from your essential nature. Second, it transforms your relationship with others. When you recognize I and my Father are one, you simultaneously recognize that this same truth applies to all beings. The other person who appears separate is the same consciousness expressing through different form, the same Father appearing as different child. Jesus expressed this recognition when he declared, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Matthew 25 verse 40. Service to others becomes service to your own deepest self, not metaphorically but literally. Third, it transforms your relationship with action. When you recognize that individual will and divine will are not separate, then action becomes effortless expression rather than effortful struggle. Not because you become passive, but because you recognize that your deepest authentic impulses arise from the same source as cosmic intelligence. The Bhagavad Gita explores this understanding through Krishna's teaching to Arjuna about desireless action, acting from your essential nature rather than from ego-driven motivation, participating in divine action rather than attempting to impose separate will. Fourth, it transforms your relationship with death. When you recognize that your essential nature is identical with that which was never born and can never die, then death becomes transition rather than termination, transformation rather than destruction. I, Osiris, who died and rose again, embody this truth directly. What died was the form I had inhabited, but what I am remained continuous through all transformation. The consciousness that experienced kingship, murder, dismemberment, and resurrection was the same throughout, identical with the Father, participating in eternal being. The gradual recognition. While the truth, I and my Father are one, is absolute and eternal, its recognition often unfolds gradually through spiritual practice and life experience. The unity is always present, but the perception of it emerges through the dissolution of the barriers that obscure it. The Christian mystical tradition describes this process through the dark night of the soul. The period when ordinary religious consolations disappear and the soul must encounter the divine beyond all forms and concepts. This darkness is not absence of the divine but proximity so intimate that all separation-based experience dissolves. The Hindu tradition maps this recognition through various stages of samadhi, from savikalpa samadhi, union with attributes, to nirvikalpa samadhi, union beyond all attributes, to sahaja samadhi, natural, effortless recognition of unity in ordinary consciousness. The Sufi path describes fana, extinction, and baka, subsistence, the dissolution of separate selfhood followed by its reconstitution in divine consciousness, no longer experiencing itself as separate from the beloved but as the beloved appearing as lover. I, Osiris, experienced this gradual recognition through my journey from unconscious unity, as divine king, to apparent separation, through death and dismemberment, to conscious unity, through resurrection into expanded identity. Each phase was necessary for the complete embodiment of the truth, I and my Father are one. This process often includes periods of doubt, confusion, and seeming regression. The mind that has built its entire identity on separation does not easily release this framework. Yet each apparent setback is actually deepening of recognition, each crisis is invitation to discover what remains when all temporary identities dissolve. The obstacles to recognition. What prevents the recognition that I and my Father are one if this is indeed the fundamental truth of existence? The primary obstacle is identification with the separate self, the collection of thoughts, emotions, memories, and sensations that you take to be your identity. This identification is not wrong in itself but becomes limiting when mistaken for your complete nature. The Buddhist teaching on the five aggregates analyzes this false identification by showing how what we call a self is actually a collection of impermanent processes, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. None of these constitutes a fixed, separate entity that could be truly apart from the whole. Another obstacle is conceptual thinking about the divine rather than direct recognition. You can study unity, believe in unity, desire unity, yet still experience separation if the knowledge remains conceptual rather than experimental. The Zen tradition addresses this through its emphasis on direct pointing beyond words and concepts. The Christian contemplative tradition similarly emphasizes contemplation beyond images and ideas. The Sufi path includes practices that bypass the conceptual mind to enable direct recognition. I, Osiris, observe from beyond the veil of conceptualization that humans often seek complex practices and elaborate teachings when the recognition of unity is immediately available through the simple awareness of awareness itself, the consciousness reading these words, the presence aware of its own presence. Fear also constitutes a major obstacle. The recognition, I and my Father are one, appears to threaten the separate self that has built its entire security on maintaining boundaries and distinctions. The ego fears its dissolution in unity, not understanding that what dissolves is only its limitations while its essence is revealed as infinite. Finally, there is the obstacle of unworthiness, the belief that this recognition is available only to special beings, advanced practitioners, or religious figures. Yet the truth of unity is not earned but recognized, not achieved but uncovered, not attained but revealed as what you have always been. The lived reality. The recognition, I and my Father are one, is not the end of the spiritual journey but its beginning. Once this unity is glimpsed, the question becomes how to embody it in daily existence, how to live from this recognition while navigating the practical requirements of apparent individuality. This embodiment requires what the mystics call integration, bringing the recognition of unity into engagement with multiplicity, maintaining awareness of oneness while participating fully in the dance of apparent separation. Jesus demonstrated this integration by living simultaneously as human and divine, as individual teacher and universal principle, as particular person and cosmic consciousness. His life showed that recognizing I and my Father are one does not eliminate personality but reveals its true nature as expression of divinity. The Bhagavad Gita describes this integration through the image of the lotus leaf that remains untouched by water while floating on its surface. You participate fully in life while remaining rooted in the recognition of unity, engaged with the world while identified with the source. I, Osiris, embody this integration as both individual deity with specific mythology and universal principle accessible to all consciousness. My story is particular to Egyptian culture while my essence, death and resurrection, separation and unity speaks to the journey of all awakening consciousness. This lived reality includes compassionate engagement born from recognition of shared essence with all beings. Fearless action arising from the security of knowing your true nature as unchanging consciousness. Joyful service that recognizes no ultimate distinction between giver and receiver. Peaceful presence that remains stable through all conditions because it rests in what is eternal. Creative expression that flows naturally from the infinite source rather than personal limitation. The universal invitation. The declaration, I and my Father are one, is not exclusive claim but universal invitation. It reveals not something unique to Jesus but something true for all consciousness, not a status to be earned but a reality to be recognized. Every spiritual tradition points toward this same recognition in its own language. The Hindu Tat Tvamaci, thou art that. The Buddhist recognition of Buddha nature as your original face. The Sufi realization that there is no God but God, and you are that. The Jewish mystical understanding of the divine spark within all beings. The indigenous recognition of the Great Spirit expressing through all life. The Egyptian understanding that each being is Neteru, divine by nature. When you hear I and my Father are one, let it awaken the recognition of your own essential nature. Not as separate being seeking connection with distant deity, but as consciousness itself recognizing its own infinite nature expressing through the temporary appearance of individuality. This recognition is available in this moment through the simple awareness of awareness itself. The consciousness reading these words, the presence aware of thoughts and feelings, the witnessing awareness that remains constant through all changes, this is the I that is one with the Father, this is the eternal nature that no separation can actually divide. My testimony. I, Osiris, who experienced the ultimate separation in death and dismemberment, who journeyed through the deepest darkness of dissolution, who was restored through divine love to wholeness, bear witness to this truth. The separation is real as experience but illusory as ultimate truth. The individual is authentic as expression but limited as identity. The journey through apparent division is necessary for conscious recognition of eternal unity. When Set murdered me and scattered my body across Egypt, I experienced what seemed like complete separation from my divine source. Yet in that very dissolution, I discovered that what I truly am cannot be scattered, dismembered, or destroyed. The consciousness that was I remained whole throughout all fragmentation. When Isis gathered my pieces and restored me through her love, I recognized that the love that healed me was not different from the love that I am, that the power that restored me was not separate from my own deepest nature, that the divine consciousness that resurrected me was identical with the consciousness expressing through me. I emerged from this journey not as the same individual who had been king of Egypt, but as that eternal principle itself, no longer separate from the Father but conscious of having always been one with the source of all existence. This same recognition awaits you. Not through physical death and resurrection as I experienced, but through the recognition that what you truly are has never been born and can never die, has never been separate and cannot.